From God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in this week's edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, September 14th, 2018. And this is our last news, nuggets, and insights till after the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll be gathering a lot of information that we're going to be bringing to you after the feast. All right, got a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about the confirmation hearings with Brett Kavanaugh and talking about how important that is with our Constitution and the bylaws and why you're seeing so much shenanigans going on in the confirmation hearings. We're also going to talk about Colin Kaepernick, who's back in the news, and it's really interesting. You see what's going on, and what we're going to do with what you would never dream, how the information from Colin Kaepernick ties into the confirmation hearings and what you've been seeing, because people don't focus on God's holy word. But we're going to do that today. Then we're going to talk about the fall holy days and the Day of Atonement. All right, so now before we get started with all those focuses, we want to talk about a couple of pieces of information in news and brief. I want to start with this. This is very, very important. Now, we're taping our program a little early this week because of the holy days. So by the time you get this news, nuggets, and insights, there is a chance that that hurricane, that's the one that's coming in right now, that we're told to be watching out for, it could be hitting land. I'm going to show you how fast things are changing. Just yesterday when I was taping the program, this was the map that I was looking at to bring in news, nuggets, and insights. And this morning, as I began taping, this is on Saturday morning now, we're taping a couple days earlier. Take a look at that left picture, how it changed in one day of all these storms that are moving off the African coast as well as in the Pacific, of what the potential is. This is incredible what's coming across here. And that's not the end. There's more coming that's lining up back in Africa. So what we're talking about now is we're talking about a hurricane that they're talking about, a Hurricane Florence. So by the time you read this or get this program, Florence could be anywhere almost touching land. Because, like I'm saying, we're doing this a little early. But I'm telling you this anyway because there's more coming, and we need to pray for God's people. We need to pray for the feast sites. It was just a week ago, there was almost nothing out there. And so all of a sudden, as we get closer and closer to God's holy days, it seems like the weather conditions just seem to erupt. So please, there's people who don't live along this coastline. There's a lot of feast sites that are all up and down this coast. Please pray, ask God's protection to protect the nation and to protect our feast sites for this year. So I wanted to bring you out there. So put that on your watch that's going for out there. Now, put on, this is another to put on your radar. Now, this is very, very important. There was a trilateral summit that took place this past weekend that almost nobody's talking about. The presidents of Russia, Turkey, and Iran met to discuss the fate of Syria. I mean, so this is critical for end-time prophecy, what we're looking at. So it is possible that what we're watching now in the beginning of this end-time scenario is you could see the beginning of an alignment of the Ezekiel 38 prophecies and how the scenario of Gog and Magog could be lining up. Because when you put this many people together in that particular area and you see where the prophecy's talking about where these problems are coming from, it wouldn't take much to see these men unite together to create a Gog-Magog scenario. The second thing you want to watch for as we look at this on your radar is they're sitting together talking about Syria of all places. And we know the capital of Syria is talked about in the Bible to be in utter ruins in destruction before the return of Jesus Christ. So put it on your radar, keep a watch, and we'll be talking a lot more about this when we get back from the Feast of Tabernacles. So now, we didn't do this last week, but on Monday was New Year's. It was the Jewish New Year, this past Monday. It was the Feast of Trumpets, September 10th. So if no one's told you, we want to be one of the first to wish you a Happy New Year. Last Monday. It's also called Rosh Hashanah and Yom Teruah. So Yom Teruah. So anyway, we wanted to let everybody know in God's plan of salvation, and part of the reason they talk about this being the new year, it's actually their fiscal year that begins. And the reason is that trumpets begins with the return of Jesus Christ ushering in his government on this earth. So it actually ties in to the plan of God. So if you didn't know that, take that little bit of information and share it with your neighbors. I'm sure they don't know about it either. One more, U.S. cutting funding to Palestinians. Trump cuts more than $200 million in aid to the Palestinians. I got to tell you something, I didn't know this. I had no idea that our country was still funding to the tune to the Palestinians while they hate our guts and want to destroy Israel and this nation, giving them $200 million a year. That's absolutely blew my mind when I heard this. So let me share with you a couple of things that I found out about, and I'm sure you're going to feel the same way. We have undertaken a review of U.S. assistance to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Gaza to ensure that these funds are spent in accordance with U.S. national interest to provide value to the U.S. taxpayer, the official said in a statement. As a result of that review, the direction of the President, we will redirect more than $200 million. So now they're looking at what's going on and said they're not using the funds properly. Well, of course not. What do you think they've been getting all this money to be able to continue to build tunnels and rockets to be able to shoot into Israel? So going on, and this came from the Hearts, which of course was more of the Palestinian newspaper, that Abbas urges the European, the Arab states to donate to UNRWA after the U.S. cuts. The Palestinian leadership believes that the U.S. cuts to the budget of the agency is meant to pressure leaders to accept the U.S. position, future position of negotiations, as well as to take refugee issues off the table. So now look what they're doing. Look at all these children. All right, so all these children, so that all this money, how much is going to them, I don't really know. But there's enough going to them that they're being supported. I watched in a live interview with a gentleman who was in 1948 in Palestine when Israel formed a state. And since 1948, this gentleman has been subsidized for his living in that community. So since 1948, I mean, what, how many years is that? 70 years? 70 years the governments have been coming together to subsidize that guy for his living. And his children and his grandchildren and 4 generations are all being subsidized. All being subsidized to this day. Gatestone wrote about the Palestinian. It's called Spitting in the Well. This came out on 9/7. It says, in reality, the Palestinians have one main message for the U.S. administration. And this is a quote from them. We hate you and incite against you, but we fully expect that you will continue to provide us with cash. Yeah. I said, you know what? That's true. They really believe that because they haven't changed what they feel about the government. So we're gonna hate you. We're gonna continue to terrorize you, and you're gonna still give us your money. And until now, it's worked to the tune of billions of dollars. It says, and when you try to help us, we reserve the right to spit in your face. And that's what's been going on. Abbas and his top officials in Ramallah evidently want to have it both ways, it said, to continue their incitement against the Trump administration while being bankrolled by the U.S. taxpayer money. Well, I agree, enough is enough. $200 million, and this has been going on every year. Absolutely unbelievable. Well, anyway, I wanted to cover that with you because you probably didn't know it like nobody in America knew it, what was going on. Here's another report from Iran now. Iran now, in retaliation to withdrawing from the agreement that we had with their nuclear missiles, has now began moving ballistic missiles within easy striking distance of Tel Aviv. Now, for them to retaliate, what they've been doing now is they're actually taking their missiles and moving in a covert fashion, what they're not supposed to do, according to a different resolution with the UN. And they're giving them to their rogue neighbors, so when it's time, they're going to begin shooting into Israel. And they will also move their missiles to where they'll be shooting into Saudi Arabia so that they will create a civil war in the Middle East. And they're positioning themselves to be able to do that, to retaliate against the United States. This came out on 9/6. amid increasing tensions between Tehran and Washington that began after Trump's administration abandoned the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed economic sanctions that have crippled the Islamic Republic. The report reveals that Iran is upping the ante by fanning out their missiles. According to Reuters, the Iranian government has given short-range ballistic missiles to Shiite proxies in Iraq and placing them close enough to strike Tel Aviv with ease. So all of this is going on as a way to threat. And what do they want? They want money from the U.S. They want to be left alone. They want to be able to do what they want to do. And just like with the Palestinians, we don't want to listen to you. We don't want to be preached at. We don't want to be talked to. You're going to do what we want you to do, and you're going to give us your money whether you like it or not. That's the bottom line of what's been going on, is we have been held ransom now for decades. So that's what you're looking at that's going on in the Middle East. Now, all of these things that are going on, these are precursors that need to be set up in place, because you're going to see these scenarios taking place, just like with the prophecy in 83, Psalm 83, where all these nations are going to form an alliance against Israel, and it's going to rise up toward the end time. It is that same alliance that's going to form a united nation of the South, becoming a king in the South, which eventually is going to push against Europe. Because many people in Europe now are rising up because of the problems of the migrants that are moving in and taking over and destroying the peace and well-being of their country. Is all going on right now, and you're beginning to see it with France finally speaking up and Germany now raising its voice, and it's in a strong voice now to stop the migration that's moving into Europe and especially Germany. So all these things you need to put into place. All these things have to come to pass to see the end-time prophecies come to fulfillment. In return now, even though the report came out, Iran reject Reuters' report that Tehran has moved missiles to Iraq. They got pictures of it they got the film of it, they got the pictures of it, and they said it's not true. They haven't moved any missiles for Iraq. So Tehran claims that the accusations of it transferring short-range ballistic missiles to allies in Iraq are false and aimed at hurting Iran's foreign relations in light of the renewed U.S. sanctions. It's like what you see, there's nothing going on behind that curtain. Nothing here to see, nothing to look at. So anyway, that's what's going on with the problems that you're looking at in the Middle East. Now, let's come home for a moment. Let's look at Chicago. This is unbelievable with the amount of murders in Chicago. Now, I watched a report last night. It was on Fox, and I believe it was on Laura Ingraham, and she showed that the murders or the killings from the war in Iraq from 2003 till today was like 3,400 people died, Americans died. But in Chicago, over 4,000 have been killed in 4 years. And so what we're looking at, 7 years, in 7 years. So what we're looking at is the murder rate in Chicago is literally higher than it is in the war in Iraq. And that's in the United States. Now, you ready for this? 39,000 people murdered in Chicago alone over the last 60 years. Can you believe that? 39,000 people killed in homicides. I wonder how many people that are shot. On the Labor Day weekend, this Labor Day weekend alone, Chicago violent weekend leaves 6 dead and more than 1,000 shots since Memorial Day. That's from Memorial Day in May, the end of May, to the beginning of September, for almost 3 months. From Friday sunset, on Friday to Sunday, 7 people were killed and another 57 wounded in gun violence. That was on the Labor Day weekend. This is a city in the United States. That brings the grisly toll to 1,026 people shot since Memorial Day, the unofficial beginning of summer. Now, you would think after all these years that something should be able to be done about this. Now, by the way, they've taken in 5,400 weapons, guns. And this city has got a strong gun control law. So the law you passed that you're going to pass gun control, you're going to stop the problem, the only people going to have guns are the criminals. And they have taken 5,400 guns off the streets in Chicago this year alone. In 1 week in Chicago, this is last month, 66 people, this was August, 66 people were shot, including 12 who died, the police say. All right, so the police superintendent, this is his comment on the deal. There is only so much we can do. We can't be on every street corner. Well, that's got to make everyone feel pretty safe. You know, we can't be everywhere at once. Well, that's just the way it is. Get used to it. Live with it. Well, they have been now for 60 years. Unbelievable what we're looking at. I'm going to tell you something that's even scarier, though. They're not the highest murder rate in the country. You're seeing it because there's more people there. Well, on a per capita basis, there's more people murdered in 7 other cities than in Chicago. That's pretty scary about the United States of what's going on. In fact, New Orleans was actually ahead of Chicago. I hadn't looked at it in a couple of months, but at the time when I looked at it, Chicago was number 7, New Orleans was number 4 with murder rate in the country. Well, anyway, I just wanted to bring that out to show you that something needs to be done, that the personality and the nature of our nation is getting uglier and is getting meaner day by day, year by year. All right, so now let's get to our first focus. I'm going to try these 2 focuses together that you probably never thought about before. Brett Kavanaugh and his confirmation hearings. All right, the hearing circus. Boy, what a sham that was. My goodness. And you got all these ladies walking around in pink with these dove-looking hats. What is that all about? They just walk around and never say a word. All right, so anyway, so going on. Did you know that a Muslim was the first to be ejected? This is quite interesting. It's what we've been talking about with the Constitution and the Muslim, what's going on here. And the Constitution is actually under assault, what's going on in this hearing. So Brett Kavanaugh, as most attorneys, most judges will tell you, is probably one of the most qualified in the country for this particular job. So at these hearings, as they began, it began under protests, and it began with just this craziness that continued to go out on for 3 days. On the very first day, they actually arrested 70 protesters that were arrested during the confirmation hearings. By the end of 3 days, over 190 people were arrested and ejected out, from the actual hearings themselves. So as they would go on, they had it all staged, and it's been proven now that many of these protests, these are paid protesters that had been brought in to just disrupt the hearing. Just totally disrupt it. So as they would go on, they would take turns. One would stand up, and then they would protest, and they'd have to slow down, and they'd have to stop till they got that person out, and they brought them in to have them arrested. And then they'd go on a little bit further, and at a very key point when the person's about to speak, another person would stand up. So this just went on and on and on as they went through the day. All the protesters were protesting special interest objectives, is what they were protesting, being primarily Roe versus Wade, right? They were not talking about the protection of the original intent of the Constitution as they went on. All right, so now, what is it about this and the protection of the Constitution that is of concern? Protesters being arrested. On the very first day, 70 protesters were arrested at that hearing. On the very first day, before the meeting was over, the 3-day hearing, over 190 people were arrested and ejected from these hearings. A protester talked about what was going on there. It said, described the room as very sober and very quiet, in a quiet and a negative way. Though the energy quickly shifted as the Muslim activist Linda Sarsour became the very first protester to get up from her seat, calling to adjourn the hearing. So what's really, really interesting here, and we need to bring out, because you see, we always need to remember when you're looking at the physical. All right, so this is what the eyes see. But spiritually, there's something more that's been going on. So actually, before she got up to talk, the whole room was in disarray as the left, or the Democrats, tried to bring this whole thing to a stop. They wanted to get this whole thing put off until after the election. So now, why is all this so important of what's going on here? We're looking at, believe it or not, from the eyes of what's taking place here, the very first person to be ejected was a Muslim. This is really interesting because this Muslim, Linda Sarsour, calls for jihad against the American government. The Jerusalem Post brought all this out July 7th, 2017. This was the headlines back from 2017. What I'm bringing to you is this. It's so interesting because you see, what we're up against is the United States putting a judge to protect the Constitution, not special interest. So to keep the Constitution going, you have all these people who are coming in to try to disrupt it. The very primary one, the very first one, being the jihad against the Constitution by a Muslim. When we look back, and we talked about this not too long ago, the United States with the USS Constitution, when it first began, the very first task that it had was to send them over to Europe to fight who? The Muslims in the Barbary Coast. So here we have the very same thing. It's almost poetic. What God's showing us here, that because we got our head in the dirt, we're not looking at what's going on. Right before our very eyes, in front of us, you're seeing the spiritual battle taking place on a physical realm. And people just don't see and don't understand what's going on here. The main issues of contention of what we're looking at that continually arise, Roe versus Wade and abortion. The majority of the people who were ejected from this hearing were women. And the women, they want to fight this abortion issue of Roe versus Wade because they're afraid they're going to reverse what's going on. The second thing that's up for attack is the integrity of the Constitution itself. So those are the areas that we're looking at when you look at the battle and the contention. This is what it boils down to every single time. So what's the biblical nugget behind all of this? What are we looking at? The issues that are under contention are those that are based in biblical law. That's why we're looking at this circus that's going on. Because right now, the protection that God's been giving our Constitution is still in place. And they're doing everything they possibly can to undermine that integrity of the Constitution. And God's people need to understand that if that Constitution is ever eroded, the protection that you and I have today to be able to deliver the message I'm giving you about this will be over. Because I'll be arrested and I will be not allowed to be able to preach what I'm sharing with you today. So now, the second focus, let's put that together now with what's going on with Colin Kaepernick. Now you're going to say, what in the world do these two things have in common? Let me show you. Colin Kaepernick back in the news. He's going to talk about he was almost the man. Did you know that? He was almost the man of the year last year in Times Magazine. He was the runner-up, by the way. He's also a protest leader, and he's also the new face for Nike. I was kind of shocked when I saw that. I said, man, what in the world is going on here? Colin Kaepernick, back in the news. Let's talk about that for a second. Runner-up, person of the year. Now he becomes a symbolic hero of many of our youth. And so when we've seen him taking a knee and the disrespect to the American flag and to the country, and not just that, I'm going to show you what else. Children in high school and junior high began doing the exact same thing. So now, the new face for Nike, September 3rd. Believe in something even if it means sacrificing everything. The truth is, he has been sitting on the bench. His previous year, he was 1-11, and he was trying to get traded and nobody would pick him up. And when all of this began to go about. So he didn't really give up anything. He was a football player who couldn't play because nobody wanted him at the time. So now, he's the new American icon. Now this is something we need to be aware of because you see, the youth today like Nike, and they like to seem to have people with protests. The true face of what we're watching goes far beyond the face of Kaepernick. Just like I told you with what was going on in the hearings. What you're looking at one thing, what's really going on is far deeper. And it's the same way here. What we're looking at goes far deeper. Remember I gave you a sermon, and I've been talking about that in News Nuggets and Insights, is about the spiritual sojourner that's taking place. So what we're looking at here is I just simply took his picture and all I did was just fade out everything, left his eyes, and said, now let's go look behind the scenes at not what he's saying, but what he's doing. God says you know them by their fruits. Look what Isaiah 5:20 says. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. All right, so now what we're looking at in the protest is protesting what? There's an epidemic of protest that's going on. Primarily is the disrespect of our society, our flag, and our nation. Nike's online sales, believe it or not, after a quick slip, the day after Labor Day, Nike sales jumped 31% after the campaign unveiled Kaepernick's campaign, the data showed. Unbelievable. And it's been up all week. The stock market's been down, Nike's been up. It's like everybody likes what's going on and keeping this protest going. After the initial dip, immediately news broke. Nike's online sales actually grew 31% from Sunday, Labor Day, all the way through to Tuesday, as compared to last year with 17% gain recorded for the same period, according to the San Francisco Bank News Report. And they've got his face all over New York. I mean, you see it on billboards, you're seeing it on like you're seeing it right here. It's just everywhere that's going on over there. So now, what are we looking at? What is behind the face of what we're looking at? Disrespect. It's a commodity of our nation itself. Disrespect is one of the gateways, like the gateway to greater sins, just like marijuana is a gateway drug for many harder drugs that people take. So it's a gateway for what? Disrespect to what? Well, we know the flag. There's disrespect for the flag. There's also disrespect for our nation. So what you may not see here is that what he's wearing in his interview on his shirt is Castro and Hugo Chavez and all of those who are in these countries that hate the United States and live in a socialist society. Here's a man making millions and millions of dollars talking about promoting the socialist society while he's disrespecting the flag itself. What else is he disrespecting? Law. God said we'd live in a time that there'd be lawlessness or iniquity would abound. So what we're looking at is the disrespect to the police officers themselves as he wears these socks with the policemen as pigs. Anyway, so that is, from Nike, the new face of America. So what are we looking at then? All of these things, when God says you know them by their fruits, we're seeing the verbal abuse and the disrespect are often a precursor to violence and other forms of abuse. All right, let's stop for a second. What did we just look at the Kavanaugh hearings? Absolutely what you're looking at here. Verbal abuse, disrespect, and forms of violence going on at the hearing. Why? Because it has become a way of the land. It's become the law of the land. You don't agree with somebody, it's basically you can do whatever you want to. It doesn't matter. In fact, disrespect is a precursor to hate. Now, this is biblical. This isn't coming from Tom. These are biblical principles, what I'm sharing with you. Bible prophecy foretells that disrespect would be a characteristic of the people in the end times. The ACLJ said this. This was on 9/15. The left is trying to obstruct the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Disruptive outbursts, Brett Kavanaugh, disruptive outbursts, shouting down, belligerent heckling, and willful violating Senate rules became a circus. Now, this came out on September 15th. So not only disrespect, we said it was a precursor to more. You actually had a senator who sat there and said, I am going to disobey the law. I'm going to release information. I'm not getting into the circus of it all, but I'm getting into the personality of what the person was doing and saying, and just challenged anybody to stop him as he breaks the law in front of everybody. Whether he actually broke the law or not is up for them to be decided. But the intent of what he was saying was going on. So what we're looking at when you tie all this in together is an attitude of hate and disrespect. And if you don't agree with me, I'm going to take you out, I'm going to pull you out, and you're going to see it get worse and worse and worse. Now, I'm going to be showing you after the Feast of Tabernacles, and I'll probably be talking about it in my sermon on the feast, talking about a Christian pastor who came over from the Middle East that was literally arrested and held in handcuffs for 6 years for preaching the gospel in the United States. That's going on. Why? Because it was in Michigan, in an area that the Muslims seemed to control, and they didn't want him there. and nothing's been said and done. And I'm going to show you that story. I might even play you the clip that runs for 7 minutes in the interview. So what we're looking at is a nation being held hostage now from an evil that continues to control and take over the nation. So that's what we're looking at. It's a spiritual epidemic. This is scripture. It says, "This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful and unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good." So you think you're going to be nice and be good to somebody, that you're going to win them over? The Bible says they're going to hate you for it when you try to do that. Traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. What you're looking at when you see all of these things putting together, what you're seeing is a nation that fills the bill of the warning God says was going to come in the last days. And as this lady's holding up that little chart, it says, "Kaepernick, have you thanked a vet lately for your right to disrespect our flag?" Because there are people who have given up everything. So let me give you just a few scriptures now, what the Bible says, and then we're going to take a break, and we're going to get into the nuggets portion of our program. Biblical honor and respect. "Honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The beginning with you take is respect from the home that begins right there. It says, "Honor all people. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. You shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man. Fear God." It says, "I am the Lord." In other words, these are things that just, when a nation doesn't respect one another and it doesn't respect its old, history shows that it's only a matter of time before it is destroyed. "Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, giving preference one to another." Says, "Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the just under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority." So God, just a few of the verses, and I could spend another whole program bringing you how the principles of the law of God should be held versus what we're looking at with the disrespect that's going along in our country. All right, we'll take a break. We got a little video here, and then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the fall holy days. In our video, it's just a little, about a 2-minute video. It's called Fearless, and I'll be right back.
Nelson Mandela once said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." There's a lot of fear in this world, and we all encounter fear every day. Mixed with our fears are our hopes. Mixed with our hopes, there is courage. It's the courage that drives us to continue, even though we don't know what tomorrow will bring. When we walk in courage, we have hope. Our hope must be in that which cannot be destroyed, something that cannot be altered, something that remains constant in this ever-changing world.
I fear for my health,
my friendships,
my ministry,
my country,
my job,
my marriage,
my faith, my kids,
my future.
Our hope must be in Him who holds the world together, in Him who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, in Him who promises to never leave us or forsake us, in Him who vows to give us hope and a future, in Him who has great plans for us. My hope is in Christ alone, the author and finisher of my faith, in whom there is no variation or shadow of change.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart,
and lean not on your own understanding.
in all your ways submit to Him,
And He will make your path straight.
Video. I was thinking about that video with that fire that go up in those little kite-looking things, and it's like, wow, as beautiful as they are, they sure can't use those out west anymore. See, one of those just fall down. Next thing you got thousands of acres of fires going on. So I don't know where they were doing that at, but it's really pretty. All right, so let's get into something a little more positive, a little more uplifting than what we've had to go through with the earlier portion of our program. Let's talk about the Day of Atonement. All right, the Day of Atonement, there's so much to talk about. I'm going to focus on basically just one area today of Day of Atonement. It's called the Day of Atonement, the Day of Affliction. It's also called the Day of At-One-ment. When you think about it, when you break it down, atonement, it's, taking Satan, putting him aside, and so all can be at one with God. The primary focus of the instructions to us is found in Leviticus 23. Verse 27 says, "Also on the 10th day of this month there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation to you. You shall afflict your souls," which means basically to fast, "and to offer an offering made to you by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work in that day, for it is a day of atonement, to make an atonement before the Lord your God. For whatsoever soul that shall be not afflicted in that same day shall be cut off from among his people." So it's pretty serious what God's telling them to do. And if you're not willing to afflict your soul, then you're not going to be a part of Israel, a part of God is what he's saying. "So whatsoever soul that does any work on that day, that same soul I will destroy from among his people. You shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It shall be to you a Sabbath of rest. You shall afflict your souls on the 9th day of the month at even from even to even, you shall celebrate your Sabbath." So it's a high day. It's a day where we put aside everything else and you depend solely upon God. So that's the instructions of what we're talking about here. So now let's go to Leviticus 16. In Leviticus 16, if you've never studied about atonement, Leviticus 16 gives you a step-by-step on how the priests were to conduct the Day of Atonement. And you'll see all the sacrifices that's going on, the sprinkling. And also on that day, they were required to enter into the Holy of Holies to stand before the mercy seat. Now that's what I want to focus on today. I want to talk about the Holy of Holies and the mercy seat. So in Leviticus 16, verse 2 says this, "So the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die, for I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat." So they couldn't come into that Holy Land, the Holy of Holies, but once a year. It was separated in the temple by a curtain, and the Bible even talks about how thick that curtain was and how it was designed. So I brought here just a picture to give you an idea, is that this is the holy place, and then they would have a curtain and they would go in and that would be the Holy of Holies. Now this shows you the diagram of how the temple was designed, and God recorded all that for us to keep, showing you the different heights of what's going on, and so that's what we're looking at with the Holy of Holies. Now here's another picture. This is an artist's rendition of what they thought it must have looked like from the instructions and the information that God left for us in the Bible. So that's inside the actual Holy of Holies. Now, this would be like the curtain where they show it here. This would be like the curtain where they would go into the Holy of Holies. So that's basically a cutaway. Now, Hebrews 8 talks about that in verse 5. It says, "Who serve unto the example of a shadow of heavenly things." So what I'm talking about now, the mercy seat inside the Holy of Holies, is that what we're talking about, what God's left for us to understand, is this was simply a type of what is actually in heaven. So that's what it's telling us about here. "Who served to the example of the shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished by God that when he was about to make the tabernacle. It says, see that you make all things according to the pattern showed you in the mount." So God was very specific. He laid it out and he gave them specific instructions on how to lay it out. It had to be a certain size. It had to be overlaid with gold. And so pretty much everything inside the Holy of Holies was inlaid with gold. All right, Hebrews 9:23 talks about that. It says, "It was therefore necessary that the pattern of the things in heavens," and this is really important. So when God built this, he's telling Moses, you make sure you do it according to the pattern I gave you. And Hebrews 9 says, because that was the pattern of the things that are in heaven, that should be purified with these. It says verse 24, "For Christ is not entered into the holy of holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. So why did God go through all of that? Because in our physical minds, we have a hard time capturing what it was God was trying to convey. So he took what was in heaven, where Christ would be seated on that mercy seat, expounding the love and forgiveness and the compassion for people like you and I, who break the laws of God, and in his mercy forgives us when we don't want to live a life of sin. So he's saying that Christ didn't get into this building, but I gave you that building so you can see where Christ is going to be. So God gives us this heavenly pattern of what's taking place there. So now back to Leviticus 16. It says, then he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from the altar before the Lord with his hands full of sweet incense, beaten fine, and bring it inside the veil. He shall put the incense of the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that is on the testimony, lest he die. So now let's take a break for a second. Let's talk about the mercy seat. Now, what is a mercy seat? Mercy actually just means one thing: unmerited pardon. So in other words, if you sin, and the Bible says we've all sinned, so nobody's got an excuse here. We've all sinned. And it says the penalty for sin is death. All right? That's the penalty for it. So it's like if you're put into an electric chair or the gas chamber or whatever, and they're about to pull the plug on you, is that Jesus Christ steps in his mercy seat, forgives the sin and takes you out and gives you back your life. Because literally, that's what he's done for all those that he calls, and he gives mercy and compassion and forgiveness to sin. But what he did is he paid the price himself so that he can sit on that mercy seat next to the Father, so that he could give us that mercy. It says, and he shall take some of the blood. The blood represented the blood of Jesus Christ when he took this blood inside that holy of holies of the bull, and he sprinkled it with his finger on the mercy seat, because that's where the mercy was going to come from. Through his blood entering into the throne next to the Father, that holy of holy place in the third temple, in that realm, that's where the blood of Christ was going, so that he could grant mercy to you and I. So he would sprinkle his finger with the mercy seat on the east side before the mercy seat, and he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. So what are we looking at? The cloud of incense. So what is the cloud of incense that we're talking about before the mercy seat? Look at Revelation chapter 8, verse 3. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. And he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which is before the throne. So we're looking at the incense here, is the prayers that come before God, and the smoke of the incense, which is the prayers of the saints which ascended before God from the angel's hands. So what Leviticus is saying is that on this day, that high priest, Jesus Christ, would take the prayers of his saints, he would go into the Holy of Holies, and through his blood he would sprinkle. And that's what the high priest would kill that goat and sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat 7 times. It says 7 times. Why 7 times? Because it is the number of completion. And so that makes the sacrifice on the mercy seat and the forgiveness for you and I complete. So that's what we're talking about here. And back then it was done only once a year. But now as you can go through, and I won't be going into all those scriptures, I'll be covering them on the Day of Atonement, and they'll probably be covering them here, just like in other places, that now you can enter that spot any time of the year. Look what it says in Hebrews 9. Now, when these things had been thus prepared, the priest always went into the first part of the tabernacle, performing the services. But into the second part, the high priest went alone once a year, and not without the blood, for which he offered for himself and for the people's sins who committed in ignorance. And the Holy Spirit indicating that the way of the holiest of all was not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle was standing. Matthew 27, verse 50, 51. This is where the tabernacle actually was now torn down, Jesus Christ being that tabernacle, not the physical tabernacle, because remember, he didn't go into that physical tabernacle because he would be the one who would go into the spiritual by the throne with God. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two, torn from the top to the bottom, and the earth quaked. So at his death, what Jesus Christ did, he actually tore the curtain open and opened the way to the Father, to the Holy of Holies. So you didn't have to go through once a year. You can go through any time in the year through Jesus Christ and through his blood. Hebrews 9:11-12 says, but the Christ came as our high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. So he was the one who had to die. That temple had to come down. And not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, he entered into the most holy place once for all, obtained eternal salvation. Hebrews 10:19-23 says this, therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus Christ, by a new and living way which he consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh, and having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. So when you keep the Feast of Atonement this year and you're going through your fast, remember what Christ did for us to give you the opportunity to come before the throne of God, to be able to speak to the Father and to be forgiven for all your sins. So when this day is over, according to the scriptures that God has given each one of us, you're washed clean. You start fresh. You got a new life. It's like you've been almost resurrected from a dead body to a fresh life in the spirit being with Jesus Christ. In the physical temple that you're in today, we live in the spiritual life of Jesus Christ within us. Well, anyway, that's what I just want to talk about today with the temple and the mercy seat and the Holy of Holies. There's a lot more to cover, a whole lot more, and we'll be talking about that here. There'll be someone else up on our Day of Atonement, which they'll be talking about all of these things that I talked to you about today. All right, from the home office, let's begin wrapping it up. All right, from the home office, as this is the last time I'll be bringing this to you, the Feast of Tabernacles, our music CD, On the Road by Mark Rosinko. At the feast, you'll be able to pick that up when you register, and we'll be giving away a 3 DVD set. It's Satan's Counterfeit Plan of Deception. We'll be giving that away this year at the Feast of Tabernacles. Pick up those when you sign up this year at the feast. And in the mail last week, we put in we put in the last two portions of our Sodom Days of Sodom, which went in with our other other videos, the 2 sermons I gave, as in the Days of Sodom. These two news nuggets and insights carried into what we were talking about in those sermons. In addition to that, to make this actually a 5 DVD collection, we got Danny Ellis with who actually started the whole thing off with his sermon on Sodom and Gomorrah. So all that's in the mail. You should be, in fact, by the time you get this News Nuggets and Insight, it should be in your mailbox. And if you haven't got it, you can write for it. We'll send it to you. Also that went out is Chuck Hunt, No Room for the Enemy. And I don't know if Jeff did that on purpose, but it seems to fit. When you look at Sodom and Gomorrah and everything there, no room for the enemy here. So that's what we're talking about. All righty, so let's begin to close our program out. There's our Pooch. He's still out on the beach. Everybody else is going back to school. We got our video today we're going to share with you. And the video we're going to close out with today is an upbeat video called, what's the name? The Potter and the Clay. A little short 3-minute video, and I'll be right back to say goodbye.
We are the clay. You are the potter. We are all works in your hands. You have a plan for our lives. A purpose. A future. You promise you won't leave us. And when we face the tests and trials, you are there. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future.
Well, that's it for our program tonight. We appreciate everyone tuning in for our last News Nuggets and Insights before the Feast of Tabernacles this year. Remember to pray for everybody with these hurricanes, that God will protect our nation, protect our feast sites. Pray for everyone's safety as they travel, and may God bless you. Have a great and inspiring feast, and we'll see you again right here, right after the Feast of Tabernacles. God be with you. Till next time, God be with you.